Hello and welcome to the presentation on flipped teaching. I'm going to go through this, not only what is flipped teaching and how to use it, but what's behind it, what's the whole concept behind it, so that way you can incorporate even little things into your basic classrooms, and then we'll get to going on how to incorporate it into your individual classes. My email is on here, so if you have any questions, or you obviously know where my office is, but if you have any questions about flipped teaching or how to incorporate it in different ways, different ideas, I do have some in this presentation as well, but you can always feel free to email me as well. All right, so what is flipped teaching altogether? Well, students obtain the initial information through independent, at home, through video content, through reading content, through podcasts, through reading a journal, through reading textbooks. So they obtain the broad information at home. A lot of times, especially if they're listening to a recorded lecture or listening to a podcast, it's very passive. And so the idea there is that the part that's easy to be transmitted, which is just the passive listening to the information or the passive reading of the information, is done at home without the expert, without the professor, without that help. And so that way when they come to class, they have those questions, they have detailed questions, they have a basic understanding of what's going on, and then we can build on top of that and make class time more efficient. So class time is used for application and skill development of material. And this is where it gets to be fun, because now when someone shows up, why are we studying on this subject? Why are we looking at this? What's the possible benefits of it? Well, when we look at it, here are some applications. Here's a case study, and let's go through this case study together. Everybody break up into groups and let's go through this case study. What would you do here? What would you do there? What therapies would be indicated? What medications would be indicated? What interventions are needed? So you can go through that and make the classroom a lot more active learning. And the activities that you do in the class then support or reinforce and highlight the important parts of that material that they went through at home. So they have a much richer, much deeper understanding of the subject. Things like worksheets that would normally done as homework are now done in groups together in class as part of an in-person learning activity. An advantage here, I hear a question where people say, well, why would a student ever come to class if they can just read the content at home and the class just highlights it? Why would a student ever come to class? What's their motivation? Here you go. The worksheets that we do together in class are due at the end of the class period. They're due at the end of that class day, and they're only over the stuff that was applied in that class period. There's ways to help out with that. Or maybe you do a quiz that's over that content of that day, or maybe you do a discussion board or a topic that's due in class with that day. So what they learned, two things that they learned from that in-class activity. How was the application from the material incorporated into today's activity? So there's things like that that could help these students be more inclined to come to class. One thing that I've done is I've included more scenario-based questions on my exams to help curb that as well, where if a student didn't come to class, they just did the homework at home, and then they just didn't show up to class because they have all the content they think they need. Well, the in-class material is what showed them the application, what gave them the application, what gave them the scenarios, and by not having that in-class component, they're less prepared traditionally for that exam or for that assessment. So those are just some quick tips and tricks there. The idea is to flip a class or part of a content of a course as part of a transformation from a teacher-centered course to design a student-centered course. And what you'll find here is that the students learn that discovering things on their own is generally more beneficial than having things spelled out for them in class, where I'm just standing in front of a PowerPoint giving a lecture, and then they're just there to absorb, listen and absorb, and hopefully find an application for it. But it's more beneficial for them to have the critical thinking aspect of the material that you're covering in class with each other in groups doing active learning than just as a result of standing up there. So learning is a result of activity that enhanced understanding. The focus no longer is on learning. When you're in front of a class, just providing a PowerPoint, just providing a lecture, the focus is on the learning, right? Okay, I say something, you learn it. I say another thing, you learn it. I say another thing, they learn it. The focus is no longer the learning. The learning now becomes secondary to activity. It gives them a context for that information. It gives them a why do I need to know this? Oh, this is why for that information. It gives them that higher critical thinking skills so they're better prepared when this comes out. So that's the idea here is we're switching it from being a provide a learning experience to now learning is secondary to the activity. The activity creates learning moments or teachable moments that we can interject and highlight the material that they already went through. So all this came from what's called blended learning pedagogy. So what is blended learning pedagogy? It's been around for a long time. It's been around since the early 2000s. The idea here is that the teacher is not the forefront of the education. It's not a performer in front of a class. You're not there to perform. The teacher now, with a student-centered learning, the teacher now works as a facilitator. We're trying to engage the discussion. We're trying to grow the thought. We're trying to grow the activity. We're trying to grow the process behind what the student is going through. So we're trying to engage them and have an active learning atmosphere. And we'll talk about in a little bit here about the active learning atmosphere versus a transmission-based learning atmosphere. But there's a pretty statistical difference between the two. All this resulted from technology advancing where we could have them listen to a podcast, watch videos. All those things are helpful to allowing these students to do that. Yes, they can still read out of a textbook and do that as well also, but that's where all this sort of came from, is that technological revolution that's going on in education. So technology allows opportunities for these students to do self-study and research and share. So when they come into the class, I can then spend most of the class, instead of talking, now spend most of the class asking them questions. What happens if this happens? What happens if that happens? Why is it this way? What are some applications here? And we can talk about that and have a deeper, richer discussion of the course material. And then when I'm asking them questions, it's a chance for them to self-study. It's a chance for them to start learning how to look this up and communicate together as a care team. They get to learn how to research. They get to learn how to develop that part of the process. So ideally, they're using both online and offline curricula in addition to traditional in-person classes. So the online, offline, like I said, it could be a textbook, an article, it could be online where they watch a video or listen to a podcast, but they have some sort of curricula that they go through before showing up to class in that traditional in-person class. That traditional in-person class is now the active part of it. That's where we get to do that whole thing. So that's what makes it flipped. That's what makes it flipped. The hard part, the academic part, is done at home. The passive part's done at home. The active part, which creates learning experiences, which creates the ability to have deeper thought process, which has the students develop higher level of thinking with the course material, that's done in class with you. And the idea here is that we can even make this more individualized. You break the students into groups of 3 or 4 people, and then groups of 3 or 4 people are working on solving this case study problem together. Well, they're working on their skills. One student over here might not be active in their group, and they might need more assistance, more help. Now I can individualize the class time more efficiently instead of just being in front, hoping everybody's absorbing the material at the same rate. We all know that's not true. Some students will attach better to material faster than others. And so in this scenario, they could spend more time at home attaching to the material. Other students, less time at home. We have those students that they get it, they're quick, and now they're bored, and they're doing something else. Well, in an active classroom, they're engaged. right? They're engaged. They're not waiting for other people to get the concepts. They're engaged. The slow learners that are usually behind and worried about their note-taking skills, now they have the time to slow the lectures down, take notes, and then when they're in the class, then that gives them time so we can come around and assist them with those concepts a little bit more. So it gives you a little bit more ability to do independent teaching as well within the classroom time. So we're using the subject and it's reinforced with technology. We're using the subject to be an active part of learning, and then we're using technology to help reinforce this. So here is an example of a teacher-centered course design. You're going to start with the course content. What do I know that's important to this field? Then we're going to go ahead and how can I organize all this content? So you try to set the lesson up into ways that it flows best. And then how do I test all this? Is it a lab? Is it a term paper? Is it a exam? How am I going to assess whether or not they know the information that I had organized from them? Then I'm going to see what did I do to teach them in this unit, whether it's a lecture, PowerPoint, what did I supply them with? And the last part is, what did I teach them in this class? Did I cover all the course objectives? Did I cover all the course objectives? If I did, great. I have done my job. They learned the information because I covered the course objectives. So it's up to them to learn it or not, but I covered the course objectives. I had assessments to make sure that they had covered the course objectives. I made sure that I taught everything in there. The information was organized, and it's stuff that's important to the field. So that's that traditional teacher-centered design. Well, let's contrast this with the student-centered design. And pay attention before I go to this next slide. Notice that the first one on here is content. Content's the first one on here. Then it ends with the learning goal or the activity. Did we go through all the learning goals, starting with the content? Well, let's see what happens next with the student-centered course design. Here you see the student-centered course design. Notice where it starts. Do you see it start over here, right? The first part here is the learning goals. What do I want the students to get out of this course? What skills do I want to see them have? What high process of thinking with this course content do I desire out of this course? So what will students be able to do by the end of this course? I want them to be able to do this with blood pressure. I want them to be able to do this with venipuncture. I want them to be able to have these skills and these high thought processes. And that's where it comes in. You start on the other end. What do I want them to get out of the course? What are the big things? And you can start to use those big things to create your next step learning objectives, right? What will the students be able to do by the end of each lesson? Okay, so I know the big things I want them to get out, the big skills I want them to get out. The next question is, what should they be able to do by the end of the lesson? Each lesson then is intentional at building up to the first goal, that learning goal, that skill. So that's the idea. You're building it off of the big things. You're reinforcing the big things by each lesson. You're reinforcing the big things by each lesson. Then once we have each lesson is purposeful at reinforcing the learning goals, then we want to see how the students will progress. That's where we design the labs. That's where we design the exams. That's where we design the papers and discussion boards. That's where we design all that stuff to make sure that they're getting it as they're going along, to make sure that they're developing those skills, the skills of the critical thought with the information, the skills of the hands-on application of that material. Then we finally get to the learning activities. What do the students need to practice in order to progress in these skills? Do they need to practice debating in an ethics class to help them understand more in depth the pluses and minuses of different things? What do they need to practice with their skills in their labs to help them develop that big skill to think under pressure, and maybe there's a different situation that comes up with a patient. What do I need to do to build that so that way they're ready to go? They have a high level of skill by the time they get to the end of that course. And then the last part, notice this is the last part. It was step 1 in the teacher-centered course design, is the content. What content can I create? What content do I need to put in there from the instructor that would help them progress? How do I support the learning goals? How do I support the learning activities? How do I support the assessments? How do I support the learning objectives with the content? Instead of starting with the content and moving on from there, it's now starting with the learning goals and then making content that supports those primary things. This makes everything purposeful, every lesson purposeful. It's going to be much more fulfilling and much more on focus to what the student needs to get out of it. So student-centered design. Here's where we look at the teacher-centered design. When we were just looking at that, might fail to impart real skills that students are expected to gain. And if the teacher's just in front of the class the whole time talking in their 2D PowerPoint presentation, it's going to be hard for them to develop skill from that. They're getting passive information. But where's the skill in that? Where's their teamwork? Where's their critical thought with that material? Is it there? Or is it passive, right? So start thinking about your courses. Where am I at with this? Am I more of a teacher-centered design in a lot of my things? Well, there's a possibility that their skills, if you're always having trouble with their skills in their labs, there's a possibility that we can change that. There's a possibility where that can improve. A teacher-centered design has the potential of treating all learners as passive and uniform in their information understanding. Hey, I'm up here. I am here for 1 hour to do this lecture, and hey, hopefully you all get it. If you don't, make sure you get with someone that took good notes. No, in this situation, where they get this stuff at home, where a student-centered learning or flipped learning, they get the information at home, they can spend more time with that. They can have their own time. Some people will get concepts faster. They can speed up the videos. They can be done with it a lot sooner. Other students can slow down and take their time and be less frustrated with the course material, not feel like they're drowning in information. They can take breaks, mental breaks as well. So when we do a student-centered design, there's the advantage. Teacher-centered design, where they all have to receive the same information at the same time, at the same rate, we're making for a less equitable classroom. And there's one of the primary advantages of going to student-centered is now they have that chance of all of them developing those skills. They all have those chance at having that higher critical thinking process. And even though that they're taking their own time to learn the academic side of it, that chance to develop those skills is something all of them can develop together. So when we're looking at this, this is a backwards design from the traditional teaching model. It's very different, but think about it for yourself. Put yourself as a student. How would I learn better as a student? Do I learn better through activity? Do I learn better through hands-on? Do I learn better through seeing it, through experiencing it, through being in front of a mannequin while we're doing this, or practicing blood pressures with other people? Do I learn better through those experiences, or do I learn better just watching a lecture, right? So think about this yourself. Do you think you would attach better to a more backward design, something where you're using an activity to create those learning experiences, or are you more that forward teaching model? So let's talk about those models. So backwards design does not sound like a good thing, but here's what it is in general. Contrasting it to a forward design. Consider the learning activities in a forward design. We're going to start with the learning activities. So how am I going to teach the content is where I start with that forward design. Then I'm going to develop assessments like quizzes and exams and papers and discussion boards. Develop those assessments around the learning activities, around the PowerPoints, around the presentations. Then at the very end, I'm going to draw those connections to the learning goals in the course. That's the forward design. That's the traditional model that's out there. Backwards design, here we go. consider the learning goals of the course first, right? I've already mentioned this before. What are the learning goals of the course first? And then what skills do I want the students to have learned when they leave the course? What do they need out of this information? What critical thought processes do they need with this information? Once the learning goals have been established, once I identify those big things that come out, now I can consider my assessments. Now I can go into that. How will I evaluate that they're getting these? How will I evaluate that their skills are being developed? Well, that's where we can get more time in the classroom to see these skills or to develop these skills, or more time for one-on-one in the class when we don't have to worry about getting through a whole lecture, right? So development of learning activities is the last part of this backward design. How do I teach to support these previous tests? The goal here is not to look at teaching. We tend to focus on the teaching and not focus on how the students are learning or engaging the material. Start with how are the students going to engage and learn with the material by going through experiences that help them. That active classroom. So I would guarantee you go to more an active classroom format. Your classrooms are going to be louder. You're going to get more questions. You're going to have a lot more scenarios that come up, but their thoughts are going to be much deeper. They're going to have more community growth with each other. They're going to develop some of those deeper skills that you want out of them with that course information. So the lesson should be inferred as a result sought, not derived from activities that we're comfortable with. I can do activities that we're comfortable with, that I'm comfortable with teaching. I'm comfortable in front of a classroom delivering a presentation or a lecture. But what are they getting out of that? Is that an active process? Is that something that their brain is going to attach to and develop a memory with? Are they going to understand the skill behind where does that apply in our field? Are they going to have development of critical thinking with it? What happens if a patient does this? What happens if that happens? Are they going to have that skill development if you do that forward design? A lot of your time is going to be spent on just the course content in that forward design. However, the backwards design is focusing on activities that will help support or reinforce that knowledge that they need. So backwards design, when we're looking at it, it's focused primarily on student learning and understanding. So take your focus not about how am I going to teach this, but now it's a focus about how is the student going to receive this the best way possible? How is the student going to get what I want them to get out of it? That's where your paradigm shifts. It's not about how it's being delivered. It's more about in what way, what package, what framework would it be best received. So when teachers design lessons, units, courses, they focus on activities and instruction rather than on the output that the student needs to get from all that information. So here, don't let the output be the downstream. Let the output help you decide how to formulate the courses, how to formulate the lessons, how to formulate that. Then you're going to see a much more purposeful classroom. The perspective can lead to the misconception that learning is an activity. Learning is not the activity. In fact, learning is derived from the careful consideration of the meaning of the activity. In other words, the activity itself is going to help develop the learning. It's going to help reinforce the material that they're going through outside of the class. It's going to help make sure that they have critical thought process behind the material. They have a lot more ability and a lot more functionality with that information. So that's the idea here. Don't focus on the learning as the activity. Focus on the activity helping them highlight and their learning secondary from that activity. Think about how you learn best. Are you one of those people that does better when you're seeing someone do it, when you're experiencing it, when you're part of the hands-on part of it, or you're someone that likes to just watch a lecture or read a book on it? That's it. So think about this, right? That's how they're receiving the information. Which one's going to be focusing on their development with that material? So what's in it for the instructor? Right? What's in it for the instructor when they're they're going through all this stuff. It encourages the instructor to establish a purpose of doing something before it's implemented into the curriculum. There's a purpose behind each thing. There's no fluff built into it. It's all purposeful. It's all to help you grow into this, because you're going to inevitably have students that say, hey, why do I care? Why do I need to know? Well, here's why, right? You're going to have the answer to why do you need to know before even the student asks it, because they're going to watch that material, they'll show up, and what's the whole class based on? Why do I need to know the material? Where does it come into play? How will I see this out there? Now they're going to have a context for all that information. They're going to have that skill with that information if you practice a skill with it. So there's the why. There's making sure it's intentional. There they see why they have to go through this different content. When you're also looking at this, it provides guidance for instruction on designing lessons. You can now make sure that you're not putting stuff in there that's busy work, that's frustrating for them at home. It's frustrating for them at home if they don't know where it goes. They don't see where it's going to be, where they're going to apply it. Once the learning goals or the results have been identified, then it's going to be a lot easier for you to develop your instruction, because your instruction is now grounded on the learning outcomes of the patient, right? Once again, it's grounded on the learning outcomes of the patient. I want to make sure I'm teaching to those outcomes. I want to make sure that the process I'm using to get them to the outcomes gets them to the outcomes, but I'm starting with the outcome. This is the outcome. How do I get there? How do I build my lessons to stagger up to that point? How do I build my lessons to support all those skills that I want them to develop? They or you will have a better idea of what you want the students to get out of the activities. So you can see what the students are going to get out of the activities. You know that, hey, this is the goal. At the end of this class day, I want you guys to tell me 2 things that you learned from these in-class activities, or post it to a discussion board, or turn it in. That's one of those things that can also help encourage them to show up to class if you're worried about them not showing up to class if the lectures are all at home. Right? They have to do that, and then you can see what the students get out of the learning activities, right? Every task and piece of instruction has a purpose. It all fits in with the overreaching goals of the course. There's nothing wasted. You're not wasting any class time. You're not wasting any homework time. It's all purposeful, meant to develop them. It's not about engaging students in content, which is what the traditional method is. Here's the content behind me. Here's me speaking about the content. It's not about engaging in the content, but providing resources necessary for them to understand the content. So yes, I can teach you the content, but how much do you understand it, right? I can say I provided it. It's in this lecture. It's on this page number, but how much do they understand it? Focus the class time on the understanding, not on the teaching. The understanding is actually a way to get them to learn it. That's the part. They have a context for it. So learning and understanding can be much better evaluated by leveraging what the student will need to know and understanding the design process. Now there's more purpose to it. So what are some stages that we do for backwards design? Well, these are the 3 primary questions that we'll ask. So we need to consider the learning goals to start with. What does the student need out of it? What should the participants hear, read, view, explore, or otherwise encounter to help them out, to be familiar with the material that we're covering? So what information within this question is important? So this is the outside content that we're looking at. So what information should I look at there? And then I should focus, here's my big one. What knowledge and skills should the participants master? That's the big focus. That's the big one, right? So I need to focus on how they're mastering that material, and then I can figure out, well, what should they hear that supports this? Well, that's where you can create your course content, your online content, or maybe there's content that's already out there for you. So what big ideas are important for the students to know, right? Big ideas and understandings are going to be the big things that we try to look at when they're going through the course or completing the course. These are going to be your assessment parts. So let's go on to this next slide. So here we are still in stage one of a backwards design. And do you see this graphic over here on the side? Consider the knowledge that the students are worth being familiar with. And that's the largest circle. This is the most information. This would be you delivering a whole lecture on the content. So that is that lecture. This is, I want them to be familiar with all this content. There you go. They're familiar with it. It's all there. It's all recorded. It's all in that textbook. It's all wherever you want to have them get that information from. Now the next question, the second question allows us, the instructors, to focus on the knowledge, the skills that are important to know and do. Now this is okay, I want them to know all this. I want to be familiar with all this. But out of this, what's important? What are the big things that we should stress? Right? Then when we do that, we begin to detail the enduring understandings, the overachieving goals, the big ideas that the student should retain. Now, by answering these questions, we can see what the enduring understanding needs to be, what the primary focus is. Now we can focus our class activities towards those. So we can focus on getting them to that desired outcome with that content. Stage two is the backwards design is going to be considered the assessments and the tasks that they need to demonstrate evidence of understanding. This could be exams, it could be papers, it could be quizzes, it could be homework assignments to support what we went through in class that day, lab projects, group projects. There's a whole bunch of things here, but how will I know as the instructor if the students have achieved the results? Could it be a quiz that has more scenario-based questions versus just straight recall questions? Right? How do I have evidence that they're progressing on a deeper level with this material? And that's the second part. How do I have evidence? How do I keep them accountable for this information? How do I know that they're growing in it? And this is important for you too as well, because then you can see what students need help or what areas are sticky that we should start the next class day with. If you have them view content and take a quiz over the information that was in the content, and then they show up for class the next day, and all of them scored low in a category, or most of them scored low in a certain part of that quiz, then it tells you, hey, I can start with this. I can spend more time in my course focusing on those sticky subjects and allowing them to be able to understand the hard parts without spending superfluous time on the subjects that people already understand. The last stage, the final stage of the backwards design, is when the instructors consider how they will teach this. How am I going to support this? Right? This is where I'm starting to create my instructional side of the course, not the activity side, but the structural side. So I'm looking at the methods that I'm going to do to help give them a clear vision of the strategies that work best, right? I'm going to help see what would work best in their scenario. So what enabling knowledge, their facts, their concepts, their principles, what skills, what will the students need to perform effectively to achieve those results? That's where I'm starting to put this in there. That's where I'm trying to find content that's going to help support that information. What activities will the students need to know? How do I make sure they have the content ready for those activities? What will need to be taught and coached? That's where you do intentionality with your active learning classroom. And then what materials are best suited to accomplish these? Notice the very last thing here is the course materials, the course content. Right? The course content's the last part, because remember, the course content is derived from making sure that we're building up the skills and the critical thinking that they need with this information. So here's an example. This is just a small example of what a lesson plan or what a way to approach this would be. Stage one, you see the desired results. So how the students will transfer the knowledge into the course and apply it outside the course. Should they know when to use an orthostatic blood pressure? Should they know when the venopuncture is indicated? Should they know when to modify procedures, right? So these are the big ones. What are some of what should they be able to do they're learning with. So what understandings do I want the student to have? What essential questions are important for this? What will the students need to know? What will the students what should the students be skilled at? We're starting with the big stuff first, and then we're filling in the rest with these other categories. What performance or tasks would support the stage one? What other evidence really would help support that stage one? And the last part, stage three, right? This is where we look at this activity. This is where we look at the lectures and discussions and problem-solving sessions that would support everything back up to stage one again. So it all starts at that first stage one. What are the big things that come out of this? And then working backwards from that. Start at the end, start at where it comes backwards, and then you're going to see more purpose as we get there. So these are examples, and I'll put these links in the notes of this as well, but these are examples of instructional methods that use backwards design. Now this is meant to talk about flipped teaching, but flipped classroom is on here. That's this one here. So that's just one method of a backwards design. So I want you to be exposed to other methods. There's the large group discussion. Here's a short website about that. Interactive learning, I love this one. This is where we use more case studies, scenarios, things like that. Cooperative learning, so team-based learning in the classroom. You have them do more team-based project. Guided note-taking, this is one of my favorite ones. We can do note-taking in the classroom to keep them engaged with the material as well. And then guided inquiry for problem solving. These are all methods that use backwards design, and of course we're talking primarily about flipped teaching, but here are some methods, other methods besides flipped teaching that may work well for you. If you're like, flipped teaching may not be for me, here are some other methods that you can incorporate that aren't as drastic or aren't as time consuming as doing a flipped teaching change. All right, flipping the classroom. Big things here. Students engage the material outside of the class, lectures, videos, textbooks, things like that. So it's more of the passive side of the information. Then you use class time for the harder work of assimilating that knowledge, of problem solving with that knowledge, discussion with that knowledge, or debates with that knowledge. So we're using it to develop it deeper, and we're going to see Bloom's taxonomy in the next slide, but this model contrasts with the traditional models where first exposure is in the classroom and the lectures in the class. The students try to assimilate the knowledge and the application of it through homework and worksheets that are done out there. If we do the worksheets in class, and that's, like I said, a great way to make sure they're doing class to keep them coming to class. If we do the worksheets in class, then there's less frustration. They're getting expert help with where the application of this material goes, when traditionally they would have to try to figure that out on their own separately without any expert material. And how frustrating is that? How much time does that take up compared to just listening to a lecture or reading a chapter? So think about some of these things there. We're flipping them. The homework, the application of the material, that's what we're focusing on in class, instead of the application of the material being in the homework, right? Where they have a tough time figuring out where it goes. So another advantage here is students receive productive feedback through the process of activities. I can see that they're developing their skills for hands-on with different things like being a puncturer. I can see those skills compared to, well, wait till the lab, and then once the lab's there, then I can see whether or not they're doing it. No, they're developing these skills. They get more productive feedback if they're understanding the subject better or not. So this ultimately reduces the need for you as the instructor to provide extensive written feedback, because now you can see them in action with the material. Seeing them in action gives them a chance to get that live feedback. So your workload changes in this situation. So when we're looking at this, the other advantage here, when you're getting feedback in person, how much easier is it for the student to accept it as a loving, constructive criticism versus a more negative intent behind it, right? So you see in a student in a paper and you say, your thought process here is a little different from where it should be in this scenario, right? How are they going to receive that? They don't know your body language. They don't see the, they haven't read the situation, but now you have a chance to give them that live feedback. Now they can sort of see your intention is pure. Your intention is to help them grow, and it's given in a way that's not meant to hurt them or anything. It's a way to help them grow with their thought process. So there could be potential there too. All right, Bloom's taxonomy. It's been revised, but this means that students at the are doing the lower levels of cognitive work here, traditionally in the classroom for traditional style, and all this application and analyzing and evaluating or creating a paper, all that stuff would be done at home without experts. So that's the level where they're supposed to gain the deeper understanding of it. They get the base knowledge at school, and they get the rest of it doing the homework. So outside the class usually focuses on all that cognitive stuff. Well, now we're flipping that. The understanding, the remembering, the passive side of it is going to be done at home, and the application, the analyzing, the thought development, the creating of that material is done together in the classroom. It makes for a much more active classroom. So here you go. Students will work on tasks of the greatest cognitive complexity and the deepest learning when the instructor is the least accessible in the traditional model, right? Look at this. Does it make sense for the instructor to be the least accessible when we're talking about where this applies? Does the student know where this applies? They're going to have a hard time. Think about you as a student. Is it hard to think about when you're going to see this information out in the field? Well, you're the one that's seen this information out in the field. You know where it applies. You know how it synthesizes. You know the thought process that needs to come out of it. So does it make sense to have them do that on their own? Or does it make sense for them to be with you and you to help them develop that process? Right? So the students would get a false sense of mastery. They become disengaged and there's shallow learning, and it can even lead to possible academic dishonesty if they're having to do it by themselves because they don't know. They don't know where this applies, and so they might be tempted to reach out. Then the transmission is what's done in class, but in the traditional model, do you see the big thing that would change if we flip this? If the transmission was where we do the synthesis of the information, we analyze the information, we apply the information, we do the critical thought process, right? We switch that over, and now they have much deeper, richer understanding. Now the worksheets, all those things start to make more sense. The scenarios in the labs when we do lab checkoffs make more sense. In the comprehension and knowledge, where usually it's just listening to the material, taking good notes, that's done passively, that's done at home. So here's what it looks like, right? This is what it looks like. We're going to have the accessibility of help. Talk about an equitable classroom. Here's the accessibility of help going up, because now instead of the teacher trying to focus on getting through their presentation and making sure all the content is delivered and hoping that that's enough for them to learn it in a meaningful way, now they're going through their content by themselves. But here's the cool thing. They're able to get more help with the synthesis of the information, with analyzing the information, with applying the information, with evaluating where this information is important. They get that help. They get that professional intervention right there with you. That's an advantage. So here's a situation, right? We're giving them a video, we're giving them basic information, learning objectives to do, and so they're going to view or read the information. Then they're going to go over here to guided practice for the skills. So that's us practicing those. Then when they go into the class meeting, maybe I show a video on how to do venipuncture, things like that. Talk them through it. Now when they go into the class, I have a quiz that reinforces the information that they went through before. It keeps them accountable for it. Then they're going to go through problems in class that applies the information that they learned previously, right? I'm going to give them scenarios. I'm going to give them case studies. We're going to talk about in depth. So that makes sure that we're reinforcing the highlights of that viewing material, of that reading material that they had to go through before. But now they've developed the skills with it. Now they've developed the critical thought process with it. Now, another thing you can do here is subsequently do a further or a follow-up homework with it. So then you can do a discussion board. What are two things we learned today? What are two things you learned today? And you can't repeat other people's statements, or have fun with it, right? So what are the things that we learned today? What's another quiz to take on that information, right? So you can have fun with it as a way as making sure that they gained that extra understanding compared to the quiz they took before and the quiz they took after. You can see their development of that. So did they master that lesson, right? You can actually see that in action. So here's case study. I'm going to have time to read these case studies. It's going to probably go a little bit over an hour. I'll try to do the best I can, but remember you can always speed up these videos too. Here's a case study where they inverted a classroom in an economics course back in 2000. Right? So they inverted this classroom and they're trying to make it more compatible with the students' varied learning styles. So they designed an inverted classroom. They flipped the classroom where they gave the students a variety of tools to get exposure outside of the class, like textbook readings, lecture videos, PowerPoint presentations, voiceovers. So they gave them these type of things. These are students that have different learning styles. Listen to me. So you might be able to engage more diverse students here. To help students prepare for the class, the students were expected to complete worksheets that were periodically and randomly collected, so that's their way of keeping the students accountable. Class time was then spent on activities. I like that. The activities encourage students to process the principles, many lectures in the classes to help highlight the important information, right? And then they would do experiments and small group discussions and application problems. So both the students and the instructors was very positive. So both the student and the instructors were positive with this. So when we're looking at this, the learning styles is an interesting thing. There is a widespread belief that matching students to the preferred learning style to instructional formats promotes learning, but in 2008 there was a study, and I'll have it in the notes here, where there was no evidence that using a teaching style paired with a specific strategy actually benefited the studies. Benefited the students at learning. So the idea here is now by doing it this way, students that are slower learners, students that are hands-on learners, students that are visual learners, students so on and so forth, we're actually able to engage more students with this style of teaching. Another case study, once again, this was also published that flipping the classroom can produce significant learning gains, right? So they had two sessions of a large enrollment in a physics class, so much more physiology based, where they were taught interactive lecture the majority of the semester, and there was no differences to the prior experiment. But during one of the 12th week of the semester, they flipped, right? They flipped that class. So they had their first exposure prior to coming to class. And the quizzes and class time and small group discussions, they would do clicker questions, so similar to Kahoots, and then written responses. So it changed it to the in-class time becoming more active with the information. Although the class discussion was supported, there was no formal lecture in the class time in the experimental group. So the experimental group, not a formal lecture, not at all. Sounds scary, right, initially. The control section, they read the same assignments prior to class. They answered most of the same clicker questions, but they were not engaged in the active learning process during the class. So during the experiments, the student engagement increased in the experimental section from 45% to 85%. Pretty significant, right? Pretty significant. So these are all things that we're trying to think about. The retention or the gains of information is something to think about when we're looking at these. Another thought, I'll be short with this one. Another thought is the student engagement rises with short lessons online, right? Student engagement increases. There's a lot of students now that are becoming more and more familiar, more and more comfortable with receiving their information from online content. So the students feel that online learning usually helps improve their performance. So what are we doing here? Are we supporting this, or are we still trying to limit this? All right, what are key elements of a flipped class? The big idea here is to provide an opportunity to get exposure to the information before class, give an incentive for students to prepare for class. That could be quizzes, worksheets, discussion boards, provide a mechanism for the student to understand the information, and then focus on in-class cognitive activities, activities that take the information to the application level, and that will support the learning of the material. All right, I like this slide. So this slide talks about active learning versus traditional lecture. The evidence that learning approaches help students learn more effectively than a transmissionist, which is your traditional lecture, is what this is looking at. So when we're seeing this, we see that there were a bunch of studies done to develop this, and I'll have this in the notes of this lecture. But we're looking at constructionist versus the active learning. And what happened here, and I'll put that whole study in the notes for this PowerPoint, is that the active learning, the probability for the students failing went down dramatically. In fact, if this was a medical study, it would actually end this control group, it would end the study early because it would no longer be ethical to continue teaching the traditional method there. So I'll link that, I'll have that in the notes for the PowerPoint so you can go through that study here. But look at the engagement, the difference that active learning makes for engaging students and keeping them in the coursework. All right, when we're looking at this, we need to provide an opportunity for them to gain the exposure prior to class. Textbook readings, lecture videos, podcasts, YouTube channels, Khan Academies, EduPuzzles. There's a bunch of different things that you can use here. Use what your students would respond to the best is what I recommend, and what you're comfortable with will change over time as you start to develop these skills. All right, now we need to provide an incentive for the students to prepare for class. So this can vary. I like to use online quizzes. That's a personal favorite of mine. I like to see what they do on their online quiz to determine sticky points, things that I need to cover more in detail. You can use worksheets. I like doing worksheets for the in-class activity. Then you can see how much information they were able to retain from that previous activity, from the online activity that they were going through previous to class, or at-home activities they were able to go through. Short writing assignments, like a little discussion board, a writing assignment, can help you gauge whether or not they're getting what they need out of it before class, that they're reviewing the material. This is meant to sort of keep them accountable for that material before they show up. And the in-class activity feedback is going to be pretty important to give them. If they're having trouble, then that's your chance to be there, and you have more time to address it compared to just working about transmitting the material altogether. So we need to make sure they're understanding the information. Pre-class assignments help show that they're prepared for it, like quizzes, like I said before. Online quizzes help you find the hard content that they're having a hard time with, and then you can address that in the class. If they're automatically graded, it can help the students understand where they're having a trouble with in the class too. So even if it's not something where you have to grade essay or fill in the blank questions or anything like that, even if it's automatically graded, they know right away, okay, I'm having trouble in these areas. Well, you can still see what areas your students are having trouble in and start that with the next thing. But the advantage here is they know they're having trouble here. They can either go back over that information, or with class time, use it to clarify. Pre-class worksheets can help them focus on the right areas through the course content that they're going through. What should I get out of this before I show up for the lab day, right? So that's a way that you can do that there. Or pre-class writing assignments can help the students clarify what they think about the subject before they come in. So that can mean better discussions once they come in. Right? So the feedback that the students need is provided in class, so that makes for a lot less time for you having to go through individual papers or assignments to do that feedback. Those discussions, the Kahoot questions, the worksheets that we do in class can check their understanding of that material as well and create teachable moments, things they're having trouble with. In-class activities, if the students have gained the basic knowledge outside of the class, then we spend time in class to promote deeper learning. Not just the base learning, but the deeper side of it, where it's applied. It depends on the learning goals, what activity we pick, and then the culture, the discipline that you're at. So this is where you have to customize it to your audience. The key is that the students are using the class time to deepen their understanding, to deepen their skills, so that way they have a better overall understanding and knowledge of the material. Through the skills, through the activity, they're learning even more than what they would with just a transmission-based learning. So what do learners benefit? What do the students get out of this? Well, if they're slow note takers, that's going to be a big advantage here because then they can take their time. Just like you listening to this lecture, you can take your time. You can pause it. You can leave. You can go to a bathroom break, right? You can come back to it, right? So they can be slower. They can rewind. They can spend more time. They're not going to be as frustrated worrying that they're not catching something that the instructor's saying. It allows them to learn at their own pace. It allows them to learn at their own pace. So that's an advantage there. It's a more equitable classroom. I don't have to worry about going too slow for some of my students, where my fast students, they're going to be bored and distracting the rest of them, right? I don't have to worry about going too fast and losing my slow students and making them very frustrated. I don't have to worry about that. That's a benefit for this style. So learners who English is an additional language, that also might help them as well, because then they can spend more time slowing everything down. They can spend more time understanding. If I use an idiom that doesn't make sense, right, that they're not familiar with, then they can go into that in more detail and not have to worry about being lost in the lecture. What if a student misses class because of illness? Well, that's less problematic because they still have the core information, the core knowledge. However, they just don't get that informational in-class application part of it. So they're less likely to fall behind. They're less likely to score poorly on that exam. They're less likely to have those issues if they have to miss a class because their kid is sick or things like that happen. It does free up in-class time for deeper dives into the content. That's good for both the students and that's good for us as the instructors. The subject matter is just much richer once they come in prepared with at least a base understanding. Then we can build upon that base. The foundation's the hard part. Once that foundation's laid, then we can start building walls and plumbing and all that stuff. So we need to be able to do that if we want to build a higher level of skill with this information. It does enable them to get used to the self-study process, which is important not only in their college career, but in their career as a healthcare provider. That's going to be important, that they're going to continue to grow and continue to learn. And we're developing that skill here. And all this, the collaboration that they use and the group work that they're using, it creates a more engaging classroom experience overall. So they're going to feel more connected to the school, more connected to the material, more connected to the course, more connected to the information than they would with just sitting there and doing transmission-based learning. All right, what are your benefits? All right, what are the teacher benefits? It frees up class time, so deeper dives into the content. I told you, big benefit here. So then you know they're coming out with better skills, better understanding of where this information applies and how to use it in different scenarios. More time for discussion on topics. You don't have to worry about running out of time, or if there's a snow day, or if there's class cancellation for any reason. Students are in a better position to ask questions. Your questions become much more rich as well. the community atmosphere that's created, because now the students are helping each other. They're developing skills when they're talking about, all right, here's a case study. What are some of the answers, right? What are some of the things that we should do with this patient when they're having this issue, right? This is a much richer atmosphere, a community atmosphere where they're all now learning how to engage that when they go out there as healthcare providers. So it's an active learning environment. They can wrestle with complex problems a lot easier. The students have more time to work together. We're not as rushed with our lessons. More time for critical thinking exercises. I love that part. The students learn at their own pace. This is great, right? Then you don't have to worry about your pacing of the lecture. More time to teach each student individually. Like I said before, if you're breaking them out into classes of three or groups of 3 or 4 to help solve a case study or come up with solutions, then you can see which students aren't as active. You could go in there and start helping them with their skills. If you see them in a group of 3 or 4 and some students having some issues with their skills, then it gives you that chance to spend time with individual students. So that's the advantage there. So you can explore the subject deeper and richer. Some frequently asked questions. What about substituting for a flipped class? That can be a difficult one. However, if your class is recorded or it's a reading thing outside them, a transmission-based educator could easily watch that lecture and transmit that same lecture if they wanted to do that. But substituting then, I think, becomes a little bit more fun, because then instead of having to learn the course material, like the individual in-depth course material, if you're substituting, it's not necessarily about you trying to learn all the information in an in-depth way. It's about you focusing on the activity that creates the question, that you're guiding and facilitating deep discussion and skill in this information. That's where it becomes more fun for substituting. So I'm biased, obviously, towards this. How do I ensure students are getting what they need out of it? That's where we need to make sure they're doing quizzes, or papers or discussion boards. So keep them accountable, right? Otherwise, why would they come in, right? If they come in, make sure that you're doing in-class assignments as well. That keeps them accountable to coming in, because they'll think, why do I need to show up if all I'm doing is the outside stuff, right? And we've already talked about some solutions for that. And then what happens if the student misses a class day? Yeah, they may not get that skill development, but there's still an equitable change so that they could do well on the knowledge-based assessments like the quizzes and exams. So where do I start? Identify what the students need to learn and participate. Focus on where the outcomes need to be with that content. Then develop the resources and homework assignments to help them prepare. So these are the videos and stuff. Have them complete simple assessments to make sure that they're comprehending the material as they go. Like I said, practice quizzes, short discussion board reflections, and then developing class activities is the biggest part. It's the biggest barrier to being successful with it, is developing those in-class activities. That's the toughest part, takes the longest part, but once you get it done, you are going to enjoy your course so much more, because now you're digging deeper into the content. The students are enjoying it more. It's a louder class, which you want. You don't want the class where 3 people are falling asleep in the back corner, right? This is an activity-based learning, and that's the big thing there. So apply a concept, apply a scenario, make a case study, have them develop those group skills. Those are some things that we look at with it. So big points here. Final thoughts. Information's taken at home. They do it, and then they put their knowledge to action in class. So it's the opposite of what we would traditionally do. And that's where they need the most help, is putting it into action. That's where they need you. They need your expert eyes and expert experiences to help them understand where this information goes. So they have deeper questions, better skill development, and they're engaging their mind more in the classroom. It's an active classroom, and there's less chance for them to disengage there. Help them develop their independent learning skills, so they learn how to continue to grow and continue to read research, continue to do that. They have better comprehension of the topics, and when it's used, they can catch up easier if they do have to miss a course day as well. So it's a more equitable chance at outcomes too. So, and the thing here, I like this last bullet point, it's a better use of time for the teachers, because you're spending less time focusing on the lecture and the content and more time helping develop the students' understanding of the content. Big difference there, big difference. And that is it. I will have my reference slide on the PowerPoint as well. Here's my reference slide. There's even more references and stuff like that in the notes, so be sure to check out the notes in the PowerPoint itself. Hopefully this was helpful to you. There are little ways you can incorporate flipped teaching, even little tiny ways like start with a case study and don't give them the answer to what the right treatment is for this patient. Start with that and then slowly develop it as you're going through the lecture. Maybe if you want to do transmission based, there's little things like that that you can do every 3 to 5 slides in your transmission lecture. Add a clinical scenario and have them start to think actively about what's going on and break them into groups, right? These are little things you can incorporate that don't take up much time to prepare. Incorporating a tiny case study that applies the next 3 slides of a PowerPoint really should not take too much time at all. And it's a way to start to do that more active learning style and start to engage their brains. Recording, like I said before, is a great way to make sure that if someone that does have to sub for you, all your information is already there. The students, they don't have an excuse saying we didn't have the same information. All right, it's already there. It's the activity that helps support that learning, the activity that helps support the deeper understanding, and that's one of the big things I want you to look at. What skills do I want them to have with this material? That's where I want them to be. All right, that's it for now. Thank you for watching.